Hey, welcome to another edition of Try Knoxville. Mike Roberts along with the ride again. And a lot of people that grew up around here or been around here in the last few years recognize the gentleman beside me here, Kevin Kincaid. First of all, I don't think I ever formally welcomed you back several years ago, but I'm glad to see you back. And you've done a lot of things with Knoxville Hospital and Clinics, but the one thing I want to talk about, as I always say, you grew up here, so we're going to jump in our way back machine.
Sure.
We're going to talk about, Kevin Kincaid of Young and growing up in Knoxville, Iowa.
Yeah, so depending on how far you want to go back, but my father worked on bridge construction. So when I was a baby, they were traveling around to wherever bridges were being built.
Sure.
So they got the job for the mile-long bridge, and my mom said, because this is where they grew up,
right?
They said, this is the last bridge, you're not moving anywhere else. And so my mom and dad bought her mom and dad's little farm. It was just an acreage at that time. But I grew up in the house that my mom grew up in. The telephone number that I learned in kindergarten is still their telephone number today.
That's awesome.
So to me that was normal, but then, meeting people over the years, I learned that, that's not exactly how things go for most people. Usually there's a lot more moves in their life.
We've talked about this with other guests, too, and you bring up the phone number. We never talked about the phone numbers. I still remember, again, my mom and dad's same phone number. Grandparents who've not been around for quite a while still remember their number. But if you ask me my daughter's number right now, I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
We never had to memorize them.
Right.
That was part of being young in small-town Iowa.
Yeah, for sure.
In school, I know you were athletic.
Mm-hmm.
Football, if I remember correctly.
Football was my game, yeah.
Yeah.
So terrible student. Just frankly, there's no other way to put it. I just got by. There was a couple of things. I missed like almost my entire first grade year from scarlet fever, and I just kind of got passed along. So I caught up just because I was a good reader and I had good reading comprehension. So that kind of saved me on that. But mathematics I struggled with as a kid, and so I was always kind of a mediocre student. And then as I got a little bit older, I kind of didn't really think school was all that necessary, frankly.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. I was going to race motorcycles professionally. That's what I was going to do. And then when that was kind of got a little bit clouded, I took an even wilder leap and thought, well, I'll be playing pro football, not realizing that I'll never see 6 foot tall.
It's funny how that works out.
Yeah. So, it took a long time for that reality to set in. But by that time, I had terrible study habits, didn't understand academic effort whatsoever, and I paid for that for a long time.
You talk about football and the fact of pro football, you have to be so big, but you were a good player in high school football. I mean, you got along real well for your size and everything else.
Yeah, I figured out pretty early on, I guess while I was not a great student, I did understand physics. Mm-hmm. You hit somebody harder than they hit you, and they take the force. And so early on, I learned to play overtly aggressive. I love the game. I listened to my coaches.
Right. I
studied the game and really worked on technique, and especially around hitting and hitting hard. And I got good at that. So it was it was kind of one of those things that actually I reached back to in later years of trying to remember what that's like to be good at something, because I had some of my own struggles moving forward, but football was something that that was my thing. I loved it. I still think about it all the time. I seen Coach Cunningham, Coach C, walking down the sidewalk yesterday, and it just took me back to the times of him yelling at me, encouraging me. And it's just awesome that I get to still see him today.
It's amazing, and I see Cunningham all the time too, and once in a while I'll bump into Marv Sloan as well. And it's amazing where back then you're like, Mike, these guys yell at me all the time. I'm getting sick of it. It instilled something in you later on in life, though, to have goals and get your dreams done. And I think that's what I didn't recognize when I was younger. I mean, I loved the game too, and I loved watching sports and everything else, but I think the hidden teachings is what I call it, where they said something that really didn't sink in at that time, but eventually you grow up and you're like, oh, that's what they meant by that.
Yeah, and it was this, this encouragement around in ways that they would say things to you at practice around, you're pretty good at this, and you have a responsibility to, as a team captain, and so you got a responsibility to your teammates, and just learning a little bit about what that meant. And trying to maximizing your whatever God gave you for gifts, just trying to play that out on the field.
Sure.
When we get together with the old classmates and the old team, doesn't take us very long before we're talking about the Knoxville Pella football game.
All the time. Let's talk motocross a little bit. I'm
Sure.
assuming Wilcox was part of the history?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So our family, where we live just north of 3M, north of there out by the lake, was pretty much, they've all been reclaimed, but they were mostly strip mines.
Sure.
So I got my first motorcycle, mini bike, when I was in kindergarten, and I learned to ride in the strip pits. So climbing gob piles and of course racing was occasionally on Wide World of Sports on Sunday, and so I started really thinking, boy, that looks exciting, and so really pushed my dad to let me get a real race bike, and so the Willits family, a lot of people might remember Mike Willits.
Yep.
He got really good. We just traveled around and raced when I was in junior high and high school. Then when it began to kind of conflict with football a little bit, started thinking about injuries and things like that. I kind of switched over to really focusing on football, but racing in my junior high years was what I loved. The thought, couldn't wait to get off the school bus, get on my dirt bike, buzz down the road, and go to the strip pits and ride and get ready to compete. I just loved it.
I'm going to make us sound old now, but you look at today's teenagers and you just never hear. I mean, again, we don't have Wilcox around here, but you don't see that many motorcycles. I mean, I think I know growing up in the country and you grew up north town, I think almost every kid had a motorcycle of some sorts, or a 3-wheeler or a 4-wheeler. It just seemed like we were always riding.
That was our entertainment. It really was. It was in our neighborhood. All the farmers, all the kids, I mean, everybody had a motorcycle.
Yeah.
And we would meet every Saturday and Sunday in large groups and ride out in the strip pits. And that's some of my strongest memories of a kid are sitting on two wheels.
Who'd you run around with as a kid, junior high school?
Same ones I'm running around with today. Yeah. Brian Clark, Gary Woodhouse, Brad Carter. These are guys that I run around with, and certainly there's some of the guys that are a little bit younger than I am, but I still see an awful lot of Donnie Smith, Tim Rankin. They just people that I've grown up with and really still enjoy to this day.
You and Donnie still ride together once in a while, don't you?
Yeah, we were riding this weekend.
Yeah. So it's something. It's funny how you can be away so long, and I wanted to bring that up because after high school you did leave.
Yeah, I did.
What was the purpose of that? Why? I mean, I left for 2 weeks, came back. I missed sprint car racing. I found out that Minneapolis was just a lot more people I didn't like.
Yeah, I think probably by the time I graduated high school and had that typical fun senior after you've graduated summer,
right?
Hanging around Knoxville, and then all my buddies and friends started going off to college, and I was like, well, I guess I go too.
Mm-hmm.
And I went down to Kirksville, Missouri, and Mark Just and I got an apartment together, and for me, it was just an absolute disaster. It was the beginning of some dark times for me, of just spiraling and basically out of control from the perspective of just being lost, not understanding what I was there for. I thought I was there to have a good time.
Right.
I didn't know that there was actually work and school involved, and so I was eventually kicked out of school. And Brian Clark and I were walking around the streets.
Mm-hmm.
This is how much thought we put into it. We walked by a recruiter's office, and we said, hey, I think we got enough money to gas up my car, and we can drive to California and just see what happens, or we can go in that office and join. And boy, I thank the Lord every day that we picked going in that office. And so, yeah, we went in, totally didn't really know what we were doing, and we signed up.
Like the scene from Stripes and Bill Murray almost. We're just, here we are,
Absolutely.
So you both signed up together. I did not know that. I know you both went in the Navy at about the same time, but I didn't signed up together.
Yeah, so at the time, part of the enlistment, you could say, all right, you want to stay together, so you enlisted with your buddy.
Sure.
They'd try to keep you together as long as you were doing the same thing.
Right.
So when we went in, the only thing that was available to do together was to go on submarines. That was not part of the original plan. I didn't think much about getting on submarines, but we chatted about it, and next thing you know, we signed up, and we were set to go to subs together.
Where'd you go to basic at?
I went to Great Lakes, and so Brian and I went to Great Lakes. So we graduated from there, and then Brian and I went to Groton, Connecticut, to submarine school, so our basic submarine training.
Sure.
We both went there, and then at the end of that, you pick what kind of boat you want to be on and where you would like to be stationed. You're not guaranteed that,
Sure.
but you could put it in there. And Brian had family in the Carolinas, and I kind of had an itching to maybe see things outside of the United States. So the only base that was out of the United States was Holy Loch, Scotland. So I asked for Holy Loch, Scotland, not even knowing what I was asking for.
Sure.
Well, I got it.
Yeah.
And then everybody said, you realize you're going to live in Groton, Connecticut. Your submarine is in Scotland, so you're going to fly in a plane from Connecticut to Scotland, and then you get on your boat, and then you go out and do your thing. So, yeah, that was kind of an eye-opening experience. Nobody told me that. I also, Brian and I went in the hard way. We showed up on subs with no rate. So basically what that means is you got to earn a job.
Sure.
You didn't have a job kind of guaranteed for you. So you had to work hard to figure out where you wanted to go and work at it, because they were pretty hard pressed to push you where they needed help, whether you wanted to do that or not. Whereas, 90+% of the guys on the boat had already been to their A school, so they had a rate. So you had machinist mates and electricians and navigation people, missile techs, all that stuff. So Brian and I showed up on our submarines without a rate, and so we had to prove to whatever division officer over that area that we had what it took to be in that area.
What did you decide to do first?
So I was sonar tech.
Okay.
That was one of the first times, as I look back, I could say that I found a job that I really loved, and then also got a little bit of a taste of what it was like to be really good at something again. Kind of back to that football analogy, because I had went through now a couple of years of everything I had done I'd failed at. So I showed up. I qualified in basically record time as a sonar operator. Did that all in my spare time. When we went to intelligence briefings, I was the go-to person for identifying any sound in the water for any different kind of Russian submarines and ships. I could visually identify. It's what I did. I studied. I really threw myself into it, and I was good at it. And then the Navy decided that as they're not going to do sonar operators anymore, they wanted every operator to be a technician.
Okay.
So they sent me to San Diego to learn how to work on the equipment that I was using headsets for. And that was something that I quickly realized, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And just basically, when I think back at those times of all the people that were trying to give me opportunities, and then I just seemed like I squandered them, I just told them I'm not doing it. Well, that doesn't go over so good in the military.
I'm going to say, how'd that go?
Yeah, that didn't go over so good. Yeah. So I ended up on another submarine in Pearl Harbor, a fast attack, which is a completely different submarine than what I was on in Holy Loch, Scotland. Again, as starting from scratch, a non-rate.
Right.
So now I don't have a rating again. And on submarines, you have to remember there's not very many people like me that was just kind of this mediocre student, really didn't have a job, just kind of the gopher on the boat, but then you kind of have to earn your way into a position. There's not very many of those.
Right.
So I was completely surrounded by the most brilliant people that I have ever been around in my life. I mean, we're talking about Naval Academy grads, MIT, Stanford engineers. I mean, these are nuclear engineers with advanced degrees, and I was just amazed at what they could do and the things that they knew, and I wanted to be like that, but I didn't know how to get there.
Right.
So the the senior hospital corpsman on the boat kind of took me under his wing and kind of introduced me to taking care of people. And that was kind of one of those first, kind of, hey, I kind of like that. This people coming to you, like saying, hey, I need something, I don't feel well, I've got this going on, and you being able to help them. I was like, that really kind of worked for me. So he ended up helping me kind of get all my paperwork together. And by then, I'm going to taking college classes whenever I can, when the submarine's in dry dock or something like that. But I went to hospital corps school. So by then, now I've figured out what it takes to do well academically. And from that point on, I just refused to be anything other than the number one in the class academically. I graduated number one in our hospital corps class. I wanted to take and do all the hardest stuff. And so I got a ton of opportunities after I got off the submarine. When you go to hospitals, military hospitals, most people that work there are either civilian contract employees or people that have never been out to the fleet. So when I show up at the hospital with ribbons and pens and awards, and I mean, just automatically they're like, "Wow, you're in charge." We
got something here.
Yeah, you're in charge, even though you don't have any more experience than anybody else. And so I was put in charge of a hematology oncology clinic at Balboa Naval Hospital, which is the largest military hospital in the world. And that really led to a lot of opportunities. Number one, the medical director, Captain George Lucan, was a captain in the Navy, was an Iowa farm kid from southwest Iowa.
A little bit of relation going on there then,
University of Iowa grad, medical school, University of Iowa, world-renowned oncologist. And he just liked me. And we connected, and he was a single guy, and he would have me over to his place. He had an awesome beach home on Mission Beach there in San Diego, and he had nice cars. He had just nice things, and I was like, wow, this is real. I'd like to have this.
Yeah, how do I get there?
How do I do this? And I remember him sitting down and saying, well, you have to work for this. You don't just get it.
Right.
And I was like, well, I don't really want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Next.
But he really pushed me hard on you're either just going to go through life mediocre, which I was kind of set to do. But he said, look, you can do more if you want, but you got to want it.
Right.
And so when my enlistment came up, he asked me what I was going to do, and I was like, I don't know, I'll figure it out later. And he was like, absolutely not. That's too risky for you not to have a direction.
Cruise control doesn't work for you.
No, not at all. So if there's not a theme working out here, you're hearing there was an influential person that put me on track all the time. And so it kind of leads to the way I try to do things today. But he said, this is on this day, I want you on the University of Iowa campus. You're going to start in this program. I want you to meet with Marilyn Holland. She's going to meet you at the front door. I mean, he had it all set up. And all I had to do was show up and perform. And so ever since then, so I was a 25-year-old freshman on the University of Iowa campus, but failure at that point was just not an option. No. It just I needed to get something done. So as time kind of progressed, I did some clinical time of actually being with patients as an X-ray tech. And then I kind of I was always somewhat interested in healthcare economics, the business side of healthcare, and also from leadership perspective. I kind of enjoyed that from clear back. I really liked those responsibilities. And so I just quickly kind of began to tune my education and my experience. I got an opportunity to be a director of a radiology department where most of the X-ray techs in the department had been X-ray techs before I was born. So a whole different crazy learning experience about, how do you lead these people that know so much more than you? And so trying to learn about humility and trying to focus on what you're good at and pull out of what do you need from them and help them feel empowered. And they stuck with me along the way, and just let me kind of grow, and corrected me along the way when I was making, pretty hefty mistakes, and just continued to try to grow there. And so I kind of thought that potentially a director of a large service line department would be kind of a good place to say, okay, that's what I do.
Right.
Well, then I got some opportunities and friends some friends introduced me to kind of some work on the executive level. And then I quickly was like, that's where I want to be. That really seems like something I want to do. Well, I was missing a graduate degree, so I went back to grad school and got a master's in health administration and graduated number 1 in that class, and just really and because of kind of some of my academic deficiencies earlier that I've carried with me to this day, I got to work really hard. I have to work really hard. Healthcare statistics, for me to get an A in that was moving a mountain. But I was not going to have anything other than A's in that program. Extremely difficult for me. So
do you think?
Yep, go ahead.
Do you think when you were younger, and I go back to the team captain thing a little bit on the high school thing, and you got that role of being the leader, and listening to your Navy story, listening to your college story, listening to your administration starting to start now. Okay, I'm the leader of this particular organization or group, but wait a minute, there's another one that's even an executive power, if you will. Is that your drive? Is that your passion? You want to be that guy to be able to not only lead but teach and instruct and show people that path, you think, as a captain would on a football team?
Yeah, and I think it would, because there's several elements of that are drivers. People have different drivers. One of my biggest fears is disappointing people around me. I don't want to do that, so I work really hard to not disappoint people, and so that's worked out well for me. And then you have certain characteristics that you have to be careful of, and making sure that you're like the perfectionists, or some of those tendencies you might have, where other people around you can just feel nitpicked to death, you know, and so it's you got to be careful of those things. But I've noticed that it's always been very difficult for me to say, okay, I've arrived. This is it. Right. I've always said, well, wait a minute. What's behind that next door? What's behind that next door? And so that kind of, anybody that knew me in high school, and certainly anybody that knew me in my early 20s, you would never in a million years say that you would follow any kind of path that would leave you to be a chief executive in an industry that's some of the most competitive in the country.
Navy probably helped on that path a lot. That whole military, not just Navy, but military itself. I mean, that kind of is a wake up call sometimes. Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting that we're talking about this right now, because just yesterday I was talking with a colleague that has a son that's struggling, early 20s, struggling, and he was asking me about, but he doesn't know a lot about my history, but as soon as he told me what his son was going through, I was like, well, hey, just pop my name on that. Yeah. And he was asking about, how did the military help me? And basically it saved me from, God knows what. Right. Just it gave me some direction. It gave me some purposes. There were some tough years early on because, the Navy demand, there's kind of a tradition of you play really hard, right, and you work hard, right. And I knew the play hard. Yeah, that was easy. I was good at that. I was well accomplished at playing hard. Exactly. But the work hard, I had to figure that out. Right. To say, hey, you just can't go out and do when you're 22 years old and you're downtown Waikiki and every night is Saturday night,
Right.
understanding you just can't do that every night,
Right.
and some moderation. And those are things I just didn't carry with me, and the military drove those in.
You learn fast.
Yeah, there just wasn't any room for nonsense to a certain level.
You got your master's. Where'd you move on from then?
So I went to the Dallas County Hospital in Perry, Iowa, as a chief operating officer, and I was there just doing hospital operations and doing a lot of the finance stuff around the clinical departments. And I knew that that's probably operationally wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. I was more interested in what the chief executive was doing, because I do enjoy working closely with medical staffs, the community, just thinking about it, everything from a higher level instead of digging down so far into the weeds. I do enjoy things at the 60,000-foot level.
Right.
And the more that you pull me into the deep details and the minutia of something, then I get disinterested. I like to look at things at a high level and think of a strategy, thinking about what does this mean 10 years from now, which lends itself really well to kind of the more chief executive thinking. And so I had some experience with the Mercy Health Network, and the board of directors here in Knoxville at that time had decided to make a management change from the management company that had been there for at least a couple decades, if not longer.
Right.
They switched over to Mercy Health Network. So then there was some discussion about, hey, why don't you interview for that job? Coming back home was like, I hadn't really thought about that, because I didn't think where I wanted to go career-wise would ever match up with my hometown. And when that door opened, I just, by then I have 2 little kids and I've got a son, seems to really like anything that I like. And it hit me this year is that, because it's what I dreamed of when this job opened up, was watching my son play on the same football field I played on. Man, I don't even know how to describe that feeling of watching him, playing linebacker and lay somebody out on the same spot that maybe I did, and it was super cool.
We have a very unique football field for those who haven't been to Knoxville yet. Check it out sometime. But I had Megan McKay on last week, and she brought up something, and it made me relate to exactly what I was thinking about you. And I mentioned this, your passion. She said, because she served on the board, she said, you may not have been the most qualified that they interviewed for that particular position, but your passion for the job, your passion for coming back to Knoxville eventually, and everything just that lined the stars up for that board. And that was back 2011 when you came back?
Yep, 2011.
Yeah. See, not bad.
That's pretty good.
Brain trap here, but you've been here 9 years, and first of all, you remodeled the whole damn hospital. Let's just be honest. I mean, you had a big project ahead of you. But what got to that point? I mean, it wasn't just you. The board of directors had to play ball, and the financing and everything else. I mean, everything has to line up to make something that big a project happen. When you first came in here, what'd you think?
Well, yeah, that's, because those are kind of some big things.
Huge.
Is, getting the job in the first place. Right. So, I know who I was interviewing against, and these were folks that had, I think, 15 plus years of chief executive experience, and I teach a couple classes at the University of Iowa in their their hospital administration program, their graduate program at the University of Iowa.
Right.
So I teach a couple classes there, and so one of the things I talk about with students is just the hyper competitiveness of what they want to do as they start to look at those C-suite positions. And getting that first opportunity is so huge and so difficult. We always joke that being an awful CEO that's been hired, it's easier to find another job as a CEO than somebody that's never been one before.
Right.
So I needed the board of directors. So there were some key people, but Stu Job, Mel Sir in a big way, Megan McKay, Pat Stockton. These were people that went out on a limb and took a chance on somebody because they had the safe base hit.
Mm-hmm.
They in their lap. They Mercy was recommending other people, that had experience because the hospital was in a difficult situation.
Sure.
But I came in with guns a-blazing interview-wise because I was like, I'm never going to get this opportunity. I could go be a CEO at any of the 1,300 community hospitals across this country. There's a lot of jobs.
Right.
They're hard to get, but I'd land one of them. But this is the one I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And so passion for sure. I went in like that. I want this job.
Right.
I made no bones about it. And so when I was given that opportunity, I think the first thing that for people that kind of understand days cash position and financial position, my first day at work we had 6 days of cash on hand.
Yeah.
That's awful. That's
why I was asking. What did you think of your first day? 'Cause
it's scary.
Yeah.
It was because again, I don't want to. People took a chance on me,
Mm-hmm.
and so the very first thing that I had to do was get our financial house in order. That just had to happen. So I had a couple of good wins there, and when I say get your financial house in order, unlike any other business, there are certain things that I can do, but other than setting strategy and direction, your providers are the ones that are ordering tests, doing procedures. So you got to have the right team together.
Right.
So we started to put together a medical staff, and we started to have more and more patients re-choose Knoxville
Mm-hmm.
as their healthcare solution for themselves and their families and their loved ones. And so we just began to start this slow growing process, and then it picked up momentum, and it's kind of like a snowball going down a hill to where, we're the only community hospital I'm aware of that recruits physicians without a professional recruiter. We don't do that. And I'm not saying that we wouldn't never do that.
House.
We do that by word of mouth. We do that by, hey, I know Dr. Law or Dr. Laughlin. I know them, and so I want to work with people like them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it makes my job crazy easy as it relates to making sure we've got the best and brightest for people to come see, because nobody comes to see me. They come there to see the physicians and our staff that support them. And they're the ones that turned the building around. I just feel like what I maybe did in those early days was showed them that it was possible.
Sure. Some of your staff that you brought in, and I was going to come at this for two different directions. First of all, it amazes me that you grew up with Brian Clark, Gary Woodhouse, and you all end up in the same building.
It's surreal.
Yeah. And then some of your staff, a lot of your staff are locals. When I say locals, Marion County people,
Sure.
if you will, for all the way from your aides all the way up to your doctors, your PAs in between. I mean, is that a factor too of do you feel comfortable with, I know this kid, I've known this kid actually since they were born and now they're working for me, or is it something taken into account?
Yeah. One thing I would say, I feel like that a benefit,
Mm-hmm.
because CEOs have to make decisions that are sometimes wildly unpopular. They could be controversial. And so sometimes it's kind of when you think about, well, gosh, I could live in Des Moines, drive to some rural community,
Right.
and then do the hard stuff, and then just go back to my safe place and nobody bothers me about it. And so I know a lot of people that's
a lot of professionals do that.
Yeah, that's how they live their lives, and I totally understand that. But what I feel like I get the benefit of the doubt of is that people understand that, my family's still here.
Mm-hmm.
My lifelong friends are here, and we take care of them every day. And so I don't, if I went on to do something else someday, the decisions that I made today will follow me for the rest. I can't dodge those.
Right.
I can't pretend that I was never at Knoxville Hospital and Clinics. This is my hometown. And so people, I think, understand that whether it's right or wrong, it came from a place of, I want to do the very best for taking care of our community.
I see that a lot in the volunteering you do as well, and the school stuff you've done in the past. We started going down this road a little bit. One of the biggest projects that you faced, besides, again, the 6 days of cash, was, okay, now it's time to do a facelift. And not just a facelift. You didn't put lipstick on a pig. I mean, you guys did a big overhaul on Knoxville Hospital and Clinics.
Yeah. So, the hospital, from a physical structure, everything needed done.
Sure.
Everything.
I think that was completed in the year you graduated.
Yeah.
Wasn't
Well,
it?
it was in 1980. So
yeah,
it's a couple years before me.
Okay.
And then, but the everything needed replaced, and so it was a very difficult decision as it relates to, well, what gets done or what gets tabled for later. So, we had to start kind of put some thinking caps on that. But just for instance, a lot of people were saying, well, a lot of people are just build a brand new hospital. You have the space to do it.
Right.
Build a brand new one, move into it, bulldoze this one. And we looked at it, and, you could be looking at $60 million at that time to build what we have today.
Right.
This hospital that we're in right now was built in 1980 for right around $12 million. So $60 million was a debt load that would be maybe doable if you were willing to be here for 3-4 years and then move on.
Right.
Then let somebody else worry about paying for it.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to work for me, and our board would have felt the same way. So we needed to remodel what we had, because it's a good structure.
Right.
It's a good, solid structure. So we began to build a brand new clinic, redid the ORs, did some things in the ER, brand new inpatient rooms, made a lot of infrastructure changes, new PT, all that stuff. So the building has kind of this newer flair to it, and
Right.
it looks, because a lot of people, when you walk in and you see something, you want it to feel up to date and modern. I mean, you just do. And so now we have a building that's more reflective of the people that work there.
Right.
I mean, we've got the docs that we have. These are people that could go anywhere. They literally could go anywhere.
Right.
And they're working here. Why is that? Well, you got to have the right place for them.
Right.
And just one small piece of that is the space that they work in. They, this is you don't become a provider, a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or PA just out on a whim. It's a calling.
Right.
You have to have that. And a part of them to being able to do such a nice job is to have space that amplifies their calling.
Mm-hmm. When you guys put your team together and you've got the building project done, how important is that? I want to call it a rating. I don't know if that's the right word of calling it, but to influence people that want to take a look at your community. I'll use Weiler for an example. People that want to move to town for Weiler or 3M or whoever. Where's the hospital rank at as far as, the care given in the community? Is it right up there with public safety and everything else?
Yeah, I mean, I call it, I'm a little bit biased. That's where I work.
Sure.
But certainly I feel like the schools and the hospitals and public safety is the cornerstone or the cornerstones of what makes a community. It's part of the identity. It's part of where people go when they need things. And for us, we wanted to strike a good balance because, I explained it to our architects as they began to put together what does it look like from the road. And, one of the things I told them is I don't want people to drive by and go, good Lord, that is why healthcare is so expensive. Look at this crazy building
Right.
that's, just out of place. I didn't want that. I wanted people to drive by and say, hey, that's cool. That looks like a nice place.
Mm-hmm.
What is that? And so the feedback I get when people, whether it's an engineer, school teacher, anybody that's touring the community thinking about relocating here, that's the feedback that I get is that they see that and they're go, oh, that looks really nice.
Sure.
But I didn't want it to be over the top.
I've had drivers, family and stuff from out here at the racetrack, and they don't know where the hospital is. And I'll say, just go on 14 South. If you get to McDonald's, you went too far, because they don't recognize it as a hospital. Like you said, it's not just a big gaudy thing that sticks out saying, this is it. And you guys are the front line for not only the racetrack, for a lot of ER stuff. What are the next steps? What's left, I guess? I mean, first of all, I need to back up a little bit more. you're talking about all these projects that you've done and things you've continued to do, but you guys are also not for profit, which I don't think sinks in, because people see their bill, they see their insurance, and like, there's no way they're not making a profit.
Yeah.
They don't understand the whole concept, and we can't really get into that today. But how tough is it to sell that next step as a non-for-profit?
Yeah, I think some of the current situations that we find ourselves in, people are becoming a little bit more aware of how healthcare works. So as it's something that I'm really interested in, we could do a whole nother program on healthcare.
I told Stitchworth that 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's that people can look at healthcare and look at what they pay for healthcare. And I would sit right here and say it's too darned expensive. And in the same breath, I can say community hospitals, rural hospitals are in economic trouble. So, well, where in the world do you pay too much for a product that leads to somebody, that product being in economic trouble?
Right.
Well, there's a lot of reasons for that, but what we count on is things like surgery and outpatient testing, and those kind of services are where we're able to make a margin and pay for things where we lose hundreds of thousands of dollars in things like emergency room, in a primary care clinic. But you can't have a hospital without inpatient rooms, or you can't have a hospital without an ER. You can't carry out your mission. So you count on other things to pay for that. So, I've had a lot of business leaders ask me about, well, what's the difference between healthcare not-for-profit and my for-profit business? And I would tell them that there's a lot of things that are very similar, very similar. The things that aren't is, imagine if you ran a gas station and say 15% of your people just pulled up and got gas and they didn't pay for it. They just left.
Right.
They got gas and left. And then you had another, say 25% that got gas, but they paid less for it than it cost you. Now imagine what you have to charge for gas to everybody else.
Exactly.
That is kind of our convoluted business model of how healthcare has evolved over the years. And so we've tried to figure out how to best do that and partner with businesses, try to keep our costs as low as possible, and be cognizant of it is too expensive for the individuals and the businesses paying for healthcare.
Right.
Yet we are running on the thinnest of margins as an industry.
Let's have that show sometime. I would like for you to come back and do that show, because that's the gas station analogy. I never heard that before, but it makes complete sense to me.
Yeah.
But we need to kind of break that down a little bit more. What are the next projects for Knoxville Hospital and Clinic to get people to start coming to town? We just voted the school bond. That was a big deal for our community. What about the hospital? What's the big plans there?
So the things that we want to focus on in the hospital is surgery. We've had most of our growth has been around surgical specialties. In the last, say, 3 years, we've had tremendous amounts of growth there, to the point where our OR capacity right now is the limiting factor. So we need to add at least another OR. So we're in the process of looking at, okay, how can we get that done? So that's a big project. In the emergency room, one of the things that we did in the original project, we did some ER work, but what we ended up with is at that time we're trying to figure out, well, how many trauma bays do we need and how many private treatment spaces do we have? So by the time we got that done, what we've found is that at any given point, we can have 1 to 2 mental health patients in our emergency room that are waiting for placement and can be there for hours. They're definitely going to be there for hours and hours waiting for placement, or it can be days. And so what we're finding is we do not have enough private treatment spaces, and we also want to build space very specific for mental health patients to keep our staff safe, keep the patients safe.
Sure.
And there's been a tremendous amount of advancements in how do you build that space, because really mental health has always been a part of the healthcare business
Right.
that we do, the services that we provide. Certainly it's been around, but not at the numbers and the levels that we see today. And what's more difficult as society kind of moved away from institutionalizing mental health patients, we kind of got away from that for a lot of good reasons, but we never really replaced it with anything that can handle the capacity. So what we end up with is community hospitals across the country have mental health patients sitting in their rural ERs waiting for placement.
Sure.
And we feel like we can do a better job on that. And doing a better job means building spaces specific for them. So those are the two big things that we want to get done.
The thing I like about the OR, and we're going to wrap this thing up after this, but when we were growing up, we'll go back again when we were kids. If you needed hip surgery, first of all, back then, a broken hip was a death sentence. Let's be honest, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't a good turnout a lot of times. You had to go to Des Moines, the metro. You had to spend weeks, if not months, up there on rehab. And now, literally, everything you guys can do, for the most part, is all right here, including the doctor's visits up front, your MRIs, your surgeries, your rehabs. You don't have to travel and be out of, by what I consider out of state. When we were kids, it was only 50 miles up the road. But, I mean, medicine's changed that much, plus you guys have the staff to do it. And that's huge. And I applaud you and your staff for stepping up and doing big things. I bring the hip thing up because my mom just had hip surgery a year ago almost. Actually, no, it was 8 months ago. And she's up walking around and just doing great.
It's amazing what we've been able to do surgically to not only extend years, but the quality of those years. A couple years ago, we did a hip replacement on a patient that was, she loved to garden.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't a hip, but his knees. And so her knees got so bad, and she was in her 90s. Years ago, you would have said, absolutely not.
No.
We're not doing that. We were able to safely do a knee replacement and knee surgery on a patient at that age, and allowed her to get back into her garden.
That's awesome.
And just thinking about the quality of time that we are able to extend for people, that really just means a ton to us, and makes it why we get up and do our thing every day.
That's a great story, because that gives people like me and you hope, because not that we ever abuse these bodies, but it's just one of those things. Hey, Kev, thanks so much for coming on the show. Again, I want to have you back. We'll discuss the whole medical side of it as far as costs and everything else too. But,
sure.
I say it at the beginning of the show. I say it now, welcome home, even though I'm about 9-10 years late.
Yeah.
But
Love being here.
You're one of the factors that makes it worth trying Knoxville out. And that's why I started the show. I just want to invite people to give us a shot.
You bet.
See what happens.
Yeah, come to Knoxville.
All right, buddy. Hey, that wraps up this edition of Try Knoxville. We'll see you all next week. Until then, be safe.